Welcome. You're here now, safe, quiet, and perhaps already feeling the heaviness behind your eyes. Let yourself settle into stillness. The only journey we'll take is a slow one, back through time, into a world very different from yours, and one you may be grateful not to have lived in. Let's begin. Close your eyes if you haven't already. Now, it's a place that hums, clatters, and grinds at all hours, even in the dark. This is Manchester, England. Imagine a city where the sky is never truly blue. Cotton is king, and the factories that line the canals, the alleys, and the rivers are temples to this new empire of thread and soot, where a soft, heavy haze seems to hang in the air always. It's the late 1830s. The world is transforming, and you live here, you work here. You are not a visitor. You are not on tour. You were born into this world of smoke and noise, and it will shape the rhythm of your entire life. You wake up to sound, not birdsong or gentle conversation, but the rasp of footsteps outside your narrow shared dwelling. Someone coughs, a child cries, a door slams. Above all, you hear the bell, the factory bell, sharp, metallic, constant. You share your small room with siblings, or maybe lodgers, depending on what your family could afford this month. Maybe there's water left in the chipped ceramic bowl, maybe not. A crust of bread or a bit of porridge, if you're lucky. No tea, no milk, just what fills the stomach before the day begins. There's no insulation. The walls sweat with the fog outside. In winter, your breath appears in the air like faint smoke. Cotton, once a luxury, is now what you spin for others, never for yourself. Your shirt is stained with oil. Your boots are too tight or too loose or coming apart. But there's no time to complain. It does not ring like a church bell. It doesn't call you to worship, but to labor. Narrow cobbled lanes greet your feet. Blackened bricks tower on both sides. Or maybe you one of the youngest here, a child hired to dart beneath the machines, retrieving broken threads and clearing debris. A scavenger, that's what they're called. Everything feels gray, even when the sun is up. The noise is constant, a thundering hum that drowns everything else. You quickly learn to read lips or use gestures. There's little room for error. One slip of the hand and a finger disappears. The overseer walks past, eyes scanning, belt at his side. He does not smile. He rarely speaks. He watches. He records. He expects. The fog doesn't burn off. It lingers, wrapped in coal dust, blown from hundreds of chimneys, fed constantly by factory boilers. Sometimes it enters your lungs and stays there. People call it brown lung, but there's no doctor to visit. If you cough, you just hope it passes. Your bed is a simple straw mattress, thin and flat. Your back burns, but there's still half the day to go. But often, it's just long enough to eat a cold meal with your back against the wall outside, and then back again to the rhythm, the dust, the machines. They learn to duck, to nod, to endure, and when they turn 12 or 13, their childhood ends completely. They are simply more labor for the factory. But many don't. Their parents need the money, or their employer bends the rules, or there is no one to enforce the law. There's little time to wash. Most mornings, you wipe your face with the same cloth you used yesterday. Your footsteps echo. The machines are already roaring. Belts spin, cogs turn, steam hisses. Their frames can squeeze between gears. They often move faster than the adults, but they tire more quickly. And when they fall behind, they are punished. The air is warm, but not pleasant. It smells like grease, sweat, and oil. The atmosphere is damp. Only when the overseer dismisses you do you step back out into the sooty dusk. Cotton dust floats in the shafts of gray light like ash after a fire. The smoke still hangs in the air, low and constant. You wear the same clothes you wore yesterday and the day before that. Perhaps a bit of salt pork if it was payday. You pass children playing in gutters, their laughter a fragile break in the rhythm of hardship. You step outside into Ancoats, or Salford, or Deansgate, depending on where you live. You walk with others. A slow shuffle. Nobody talks much. Everyone is going to the same place. Conversation at the end of the day takes energy, and there isn't much left. You keep working, eyes forward, always, because stopping means losing everything. You fall asleep to the coughing of others, the whistle of the wind through the cracked window, the sound of someone weeping next door, so quietly you're not sure if it's real or a dream, and you are already tired. The factory floor. The building is massive, tall, with high grated windows, but the light doesn't reach very far inside. The floor is stone. You take your place at the machine you've been assigned. There is no conversation. You wouldn't hear it anyway. The machines do not stop. Not when someone coughs, not when someone faints, not when someone bleeds. Time seems to slow down. There is no clock on the wall, only the rhythm of your body, aching, and the rising urgency in your hunger. You begin to sweat. Cotton dust clings to your damp skin, making it itch. There are breaks, technically. One short pause in the middle of the day, your feet ache. The children beside you, you are not the only one. There are dozens of you, hundreds, and among you, the children, small, fast, and underpaid. Some begin working at 6 years old. Their hands are nimble. The law says they should attend school part of the time. You hear the familiar cries when someone is scolded, or worse, but you do not look up. Children grow up fast here. They learn not to play. There are injuries, sometimes minor, a scraped knee, a cut hand, sometimes worse. But no one speaks of these for long, because talking about it changes nothing. Evening comes slowly when the bell rings again. It's not a song of freedom, it's just an end. The machines do not stop immediately. You must clean, arrange, sweep. The streets are no brighter than the factory. Gas lamps flicker. Their glow is weak. You don't go out for a walk or to relax. You go home. You pass the alehouse, the pawn shop, and the chapel. At home, dinner may be waiting. A broth, maybe, with potatoes. You eat slowly, saying little. You go to bed early or late, depending on your shift tomorrow. There is no softness to your mattress, no heating to comfort you. You close your eyes, and in the morning, it begins again. The morning bell rings again. But this time, your body is already awake before it sounds, not because of anticipation, not because of excitement, but because the ache in your muscles has become a kind of alarm, a dull, pulsing memory that wakes you before the day even begins, and spent by coal carts rumbling down the street, and by how many pieces of thread you manage to spin without error. Another day nearly identical to the last, not out of curiosity. That part of you dulled some time ago. You notice, on the edge of the pavement, a thin gray puddle that's steaming faintly. It smells of ash and soot, waiting to be old enough, tall enough, tired enough to be allowed inside the factories, or perhaps already inside them, but not yet numb to it. Children are gathered near it, poking at it with sticks, stirring up layers of black sediment. One of them is barefoot. Another has the same color of dust on their face as you often find on your clothes after a long day. His hands are blackened with coal. Not a spinner, a stoker, perhaps, working the furnaces beneath the mill. His eyes look past you, not in disdain, just in exhaustion or habit. Dozens of people live inside, crammed into rooms the size of closets. Most are single men, newly arrived from Ireland or rural villages. The land they left behind could no longer feed them, so they came here, drawn by rumors of work, of wages, of food. You try to ignore it. Hunger is as much a part of the day as the machines. You learn to carry it, the hollow feeling in your gut, the slight trembling in your fingers. If there's meat, it's usually salted and dry. You eat quickly in a corner of the yard, sharing the space with rats that scurry under the fence. The smell is enticing, but the prices are high. You stare for a moment, then look away. Not today. Some people go to charity hospitals, where the lines are long and the beds are full. Tuberculosis is common, though most don't know the name for it. They just call it consumption, because it seems to slowly consume people from the inside out. Others rely on herbal remedies or the advice of elders, a poultice, a compress, a whispered prayer. Everyone eats quickly. No one wants to miss the bell or stop at a friend's home. Another narrow house filled with smoke and echoing with footsteps above and below. You eat when you can, but even then, it's rarely enough. But because you heard that a water pipe burst near the main alley, and you'd rather not begin your shift with soaked boots, meat, when it's affordable, is sometimes past its best. But sometimes, just sometimes, you find a patch of grass between buildings, a few weeds, a breeze that smells less of smoke and more of something forgotten, earth, rain, leaves, or a strike elsewhere in the city, and you get a taste of something different. Not rest exactly, that's a luxury, but a slower day. You've learned not to ask too many questions. You eat what's in front of you. There is still noise, of course, always, but your mind starts to drift. At first, it's just a tickle in the throat. How unlike the lives your grandparents may have led in the fields or villages far from here, or not. If you're well enough, the next day you return. If you're not, someone else takes your place. Then more persistent, then deeper. Her face flushes. She tries to keep working. She knows the overseer is watching. Just what someone remembered to hand you in the morning, or nothing at all. Hunger becomes a quiet companion, and you try not to look too closely at it. This is the rhythm now, not measured by weeks or seasons, but by factory shifts, by wages earned. There are no weekends, no holidays, unless the factory grants it, or the church demands it, or the machines break, which is rare. This morning, you decide to take a slightly different path on your way to work. You walk along a quieter street, flanked by low, worn brick houses. This is Manchester, too, the childhood version. It looks like play, but it's just waiting, the lodging house. Others work night shifts and only emerge during the gray afternoons. They walk like ghosts, hunched, slow, disconnected. You pass a lodging house, one of the larger ones. Some of them are in your factory. You see their faces in the mornings, blank and quiet. One man sits outside on the steps, smoking a clay pipe. There are no greetings, not because people are unkind here, but because words are rationed, just like everything else. You only say what needs saying. The food, and what's missing at your work table today. You feel hunger arrive earlier. The food that's available isn't always trustworthy. Milk is often watered down. Bread can be made with flour, stretched by chalk. Most days, you bring a small tin with leftover potato or cold oats. If you're a child, there's no packed lunch. Some days, vendors come to the mill gates, women selling pies, boiled puddings, and weak ale. Illness and silence, you hear someone coughing more than usual today. A young woman in the row beside yours. The machines don't stop for illness. If you collapse, you are carried outside, laid on a bench, and left to recover. There are no sick days, no medical leave. The doctor is far away and too expensive anyway. Infections spread easily. Here, the air is thick. The rooms are crowded. Yet life continues because it must. The rare day off. Occasionally, though rarely, the factory is closed. Maybe a power outage or a holy day. You walk the canals or sit on a low wall watching wagons pass. Maybe you visit a chapel. There are few places of greenery in the city. Parks are rare. Nature is distant. You sit for a while, letting the silence stretch longer than usual. And in that drift, something stirs. Not rebellion, not yet, but awareness of how strange this life is, how relentless. But the thought passes. The bell will ring again tomorrow, and you will go. The factory walls seem taller today. Not physically, they haven't changed. But something in you has shifted, slightly. The daily grind hasn't stopped, but it feels heavier. This is the nature of endurance, of labor that never ends. It isn't the pain that breaks you, not directly. It's the repetition, the sameness, the knowledge that tomorrow will be no different. And still, you rise, because to stop is to fall behind. And in Manchester, in the heart of the cotton empire, falling behind has consequences. The cotton dust never settles inside the mill. Everything is in motion, not just the looms or the wheels or the belts above your head, but the air itself. The cotton dust never rests. It floats, suspended, as though the very air is made of it. You can feel it coating your tongue, settling in the corners of your eyes. It clings to your eyelashes. It creeps into your ears. And most of all, it finds your lungs. You cough once, quietly. Others do the same, some more than once. But you've learned to keep it quiet. There is no comfort in coughing, only attention, a rattling breath, a slow decline. But most ignore it until they can't. By then, there is no treatment, until one day they stop coming to the mill. Their names are spoken once or twice, and then replaced. The machine must keep turning, only rest. And rest, in this world, rarely pays the rent, and not the kind you want. Some older workers have what they call the spinner's wheeze, like stepping outside after hours in a dark room. The quiet feels unnatural. Your ears ring, trying to fill the gap. You've seen some of your elders waste away, not suddenly, but gradually, losing weight, losing strength. Not just what you do, but how you hear, how you think, how you breathe, the sound that follows. You, boys with soot on their faces, old men leaning on canes, watching life pass with slow eyes. There is a sound you carry with you, not a song, not a voice, but a low, steady roar. The factory is never truly silent. Even after your shift ends, the noise lingers in your head. But sometimes, just sometimes, you catch a trace of something better. Fresh bread from a window, or the warm scent of onions frying in lard. Inside, warmth, sound, and a drink that dulls the edges of thought. Just steps leading down into dark cellars or narrow hallways that never see sunlight. A mechanical hum, a clatter of gears, a memory of repetition. It follows you home, into your bed, into your sleep. When you close your eyes, the machines are still turning. You hear them in dreams, sometimes faint, sometimes sharp. They spin even when your body is still. Not just the labor, but the small, flickering escapes, even if only for an hour. You hear footsteps above, murmurs through the walls. On Sundays, when the mills close, you expect peace, and in a way, it comes. But the silence is disorienting. Your feet ache in places you didn't notice during the day. You think about your next shift, the next payday, the next winter. But eventually, your thoughts blur. You press your hands to your face, feeling the rough calluses growing there. Still, it's enough to loosen the stiffness in your back. This is how the factory becomes part of you. The streets between shifts, the streets between the factory and home are narrow. Brick walls rise high on either side. Clotheslines hang overhead like tired bunting. Rainwater pools between loose cobbles. There's a man at the next table singing softly, a song about fields and skies and a place far from here. You do not know if he has ever seen such places, but the tune is old, familiar, almost comforting. You walk these streets every day, so do hundreds of others. Women with baskets. There are few shops, a butcher, a grocer with a thin selection, a woman selling coal by the sack. Most homes have no front garden. The air smells of smoke, urine, and sour ale. You pause, breathing in slowly, then continue walking. The public house and the quiet escape. At the end of the street, the public house glows with yellow gaslight. Its door swings open and closed as men enter in pairs or alone. You don't always go in, but sometimes you do. Not for revelry. There is little laughter here, just nods, low voices, shared complaints. The beer is cheap and bitter. The wooden tables sticky with old spills. A fire burns, but it's weak. You sit quietly. Let your mind wander. This too is part of life in Manchester. The bed and the body that never rests at home. Your bed waits, flat, lumpy, shared perhaps with a sibling or a spouse. The room is damp, the ceiling low, the candlelight flickers. You pull the blanket tight. Your skin still itches faintly from the dust. Your ears still hum. You try to stretch out your limbs, but stiffness makes it hard. Sleep comes slowly, sometimes not at all. And just before you drift away, you remember the bell. It will ring again, and your body will rise. Not because it's ready, but because it must. You've made it to the final stretch of another long shift. But there's no celebration, no applause, no sense of completion. Only a slow loosening of tension in your shoulders. A dull ache settling deeper into your bones. For those living in industrial Manchester, this wasn't a phase of life, it was life. Endless days folded into each other. Weeks passed, not with events, but with fatigue. And time became not something to look forward to, but something to endure. Let's return to that rhythm one last time, gently, slowly, to see how a life lived under soot and steam might end, or simply continue. Growing old, growing invisible, there is a quiet cruelty in growing old when your labor defines your value. If your hands are too stiff to tie thread, if your back refuses to bend over the loom, the factory finds someone else, younger, stronger, cheaper. 40 can feel like 60, and 60, if you get there, is a marvel. You become thin, bent, half blind. If they can spare the wages, if they're not already broken themselves. The less fortunate sleep alone in single rooms, where the wind creeps through the cracks and the memories never quite leave. You might work fewer hours, or do simpler tasks, sweeping floors, minding doorways, tending machines with slow hands and slower breath. Many workers do not reach what we would now call old age, but there is no pension, no comfort in retirement. You work until you cannot, and then you rely on family, if you have any. The lucky ones live with married children, given a bed in a back corner, perhaps near a fire. Still, you keep habits, a folded letter from a cousin in Leeds or Liverpool. You might hum a tune your mother sang back before you ever heard the word loom. In showing a new apprentice how not to get caught in the gears, in lasting another year without missing a day. Their bright chirps stand out against the city's grayness. Others tend small rooftop gardens, a few pots of rosemary or cabbage, despite the soot. These things are not grand, but they are real, and they matter. You could close your eyes and walk the floor of the factory with perfect accuracy. You could recall the turn of the gear, the scent of the grease, the sound of your neighbor's footfalls beside yours. But suddenly, a constant ringing, then a sudden silence where once there was sound. The machines have worn away your senses. You don't hear the mill whistle anymore. You only see others react, and you follow. Rise early, dress slowly, sip thin tea if you can afford it. Listen to the bells, listen to the street. The small joys of familiarity, a patch of sun that sneaks through the factory's grimy window. The rhythm of the looms is etched into your muscles. The rare warmth of another worker's smile, shared across the rows of spinning frames. And yet, even in such a place, life is not completely without beauty. Words seem heavier the older you get. A moment of peace in the morning, before the bell. Some workers find rhythm in their routine, a kind of quiet pride in knowing every part of their machine. You might keep a tin of keepsakes, a chipped thimble, a faded ribbon. Some people keep birds, canaries, mostly. What the factory took and what it left behind as years pass. You notice your hearing fade, not naturally, not gradually. Your hands, too, are shaped by work. The joints grow stiff, the skin cracks. Your fingers no longer straighten completely. But even as the body weakens, the memory does not. When younger workers complain, you don't scold. You listen, you nod. You've made the same complaints before. You just say them less often now. Sometimes, when sitting alone, you wonder what it might have been like to work the land instead, to rise with the sun, to follow the seasons. Imagine again, not the factory floor this time, but the quiet before something breaks. A cottage nestled into a damp hill on the edge of town. A fire burning low. A man seated, his shoulders bent not from age, but from worry. His hands, once strong, twitch slightly from months without steady work. His name may be lost to history, but we'll call him Thomas. He isn't a villain. He isn't a revolutionary. He's just a man who learned a trade, followed it, and now watches as that trade slips away, replaced by something faster, larger, and beyond his grasp. He is a framework knitter, a weaver, a skilled man, and his world is changing faster than he can bear. The machine comes quietly. It didn't happen all at once. There was no great announcement, no trumpet call. The new machines arrived not with fanfare, but with silence. Loaded off wagons, rolled into back rooms, assembled behind closed doors. The spinning jenny, the power loom, the stocking frame. These machines could do in hours what Thomas could once spend all day perfecting by hand. They were not inherently evil. They were not designed to punish, but they were relentless. They did not tire. They did not bargain. And, perhaps worst of all, they did not require Thomas's skill. The masters, the wealthy manufacturers, began hiring cheaper labor. Boys, sometimes, or young women, people who could be taught to operate a machine for pennies. The need for craftsmanship declined. The wages for skilled men collapsed, and so Thomas waited. At first, he thought the machines would break, or that quality would win, that the old ways would hold value, but the orders kept coming, and not to him. The machines did not break, and neither did the system that fed them. The whisper of resistance there were whispers, of course, at taverns, in alleyways, among the cottages, quiet voices speaking of resistance, not petitions or protests, but something more direct. The name Ludd began appearing on notes slipped under doors, scribbled onto walls, shouted during arguments. Ned Ludd, they said, had smashed a frame in Nottingham. Some claimed he was a weaver. Others said he never existed at all, a kind of ghost hero, invented to carry the weight of their anger. But it didn't matter. The name gave form to the feeling. To be a Luddite was to say enough, to say this is not progress, this is survival, stripped from us, to say if no one listens to our voices, perhaps they will listen to our hammers. And so, on a cold night, Thomas leaves his cottage. He joins others, faces drawn, silent, familiar. They carry no banners, only tools. They move toward a workshop where new machines sit idle in the dark. The smash, the breaking of a frame is not loud. It begins with splintering wood, then the screech of metal wrenched from its housing. It ends with silence, a machine rendered useless. It takes only minutes, but those minutes change something, not just in the workshop or for the factory owner, but in Thomas. For the first time in years, he feels heard, not by a crowd or a government, but by himself, by his fellow workers. The act is not joyful, but it is certain. There is no violence against people, only against the machines. But even so, the punishment, if caught, is death. They know this, and still they return home. The government watches news, travels quickly. Not the full story, of course, but a version of it. Frame breakers, riots, saboteurs. The newspapers use these words freely. Politicians speak of anarchy, of the lawless North. And so soldiers are sent by the hundreds, then thousands. More troops are stationed in industrial England than on the battlefield in Europe. Rewards are offered. Trials are held. Informants emerge. And when men are caught, they are hanged, or transported, or imprisoned. Still, the Luddites return, sometimes at night, sometimes in open defiance. The tools of their resistance are always the same. Their bodies, their knowledge of the land, their refusal to vanish quietly, but eventually they do vanish. When the last frame was broken, there was no parade, no declaration of victory, no final gathering, just silence and absence. The Luddites, those who had once whispered in taverns and slipped through alleyways by moonlight, had begun to disappear. Some were dead, others imprisoned, many more simply faded back into the shadows of mill towns and moorland villages. The rebellion did not end with a battle. It ended with hunger, with fear, and with the slow realization that the world they fought for was no longer coming back. But Thomas, the man whose hands once held the hammer, still wakes each day, still steps out into the gray, unchanging light of post-rebellion Manchester, still breathes the same smoke-filled air, still carries the memory of splintered wood and shouted names. And now, no one dares say Lud out loud. The long years after the factory walls seem taller now, not because they have grown, but because Thomas has shrunk, not in stature, but in spirit. He works odd jobs, repairs boots, helps unload wagons, tends gardens for a few pennies when someone in the better streets has hedges that need trimming. But his skill, the weaving, the fine stitching, is no longer wanted. The machines do it faster, cheaper, and now newer machines have come, again, more efficient, more relentless. His neighbors no longer speak of breaking anything. They speak of feeding their children, of finding coal before winter, of the price of soap and bread. A woman he once marched beside now works in a laundry, her hands red and cracked. A boy who once brought messages to the Luddites now wears a constable's badge. People adapt because they must. Thomas does not speak of what he did. He carries it quietly, like an old scar beneath a coat, a letter never sent one evening. As rain taps gently on the roof, Thomas sits at the table with a stub of pencil. He begins to write, not to a friend, not even to the authorities, but to something deeper, to memory, perhaps, to the idea of Ned Ludd, or to himself, long ago. He writes slowly, with a hand that trembles. They said we were lawless, that we hated progress, but we loved our work. We were proud of it. We didn't want to burn the future. We just didn't want to be erased by it. He stops, stares at the words, then folds the paper, places it beneath a loose stone in the hearth. No one will read it, but it doesn't matter. The act of writing is enough. The quiet memory of defiance years pass. The name Luddite becomes something else, a slur almost, a word people laugh at, a term thrown at those who fear technology. But Thomas remembers differently. He remembers men who were desperate, who asked for fairness and found none, who did not want to destroy machines, but wanted machines not to destroy them. He walks the streets sometimes, past the factories, now glowing brighter with gaslight. The children who enter them are smaller than ever, the hours just as long. But now, no one smashes anything. No one dares. Resistance has become something distant, something historical, but in quiet moments. When Thomas sees a worker slump against a wall, or hears a cough echo in the alley, he remembers the night the frame broke, the sound it made, the stillness after. He remembers what it felt like to believe, even briefly, that someone might listen. A grave with no inscription. One winter morning, the frost lingers late. Thomas does not rise. His neighbors knock, then enter. They find him in his bed, still and quiet, a faint smile on his face, though his hands are folded like someone holding on to something unseen. He leaves no fortune, no family, just a room, a few tools, a sealed letter no one opens. He is buried in the parish yard near the edge. No stone marks his name, just a patch of grass that greens early in spring. No one speaks of the Luddites anymore, but when the wind moves through the mill chimneys just right, when the bricks groan and the old doors creak, There are some who still pause, some who feel that old echo, the one that says, "We were here, too." After the last hammer falls, something else begins. Not rebuilding, not healing, but a kind of forgetting. A forgetting that is slow, unspoken, almost deliberate. The Luddites, real, ordinary people with tired hands and full hearts, begin to vanish from memory. Not all at once, but gradually. Their names disappear from the walls. The stories change. Their anger is reduced to disorder. Their sorrow ignored. You hear them described now with distance. Radicals, rebels, disruptors. But those who lived beside them knew a different truth. They were neighbors, fathers, weavers, children of a world dissolving beneath their feet. The weight of progress. Walk through Manchester and you feel it. The speed, not in footsteps, but in transformation. In just a few decades, what was once a market town has become a living engine. The skyline is crowded with smokestacks. The river Irwell runs thick with runoff. Railways appear, splitting neighborhoods like scars. Street lamps flicker on earlier each evening, fed by underground gas lines. Change is constant, relentless, but not kind. The wealth this change brings is real for some. Merchant families grow rich. Shareholders swell with pride. Government ministers speak of British genius, of innovation, of destiny. But for the workers, for those who built these walls brick by brick, this progress feels like being swept downstream, not in a boat, but clinging to driftwood, watching familiar shores vanish. And for the Luddites, the injustice wasn't just economic, it was spiritual. To lose your trade was to lose your place in the order of things. You didn't just lose work, you lost worth, the story that's not told in schools. If the Luddites are mentioned at all, it is briefly, a footnote, a warning. They opposed technology, the teacher says. They didn't understand innovation, but that isn't true. They understood it all too well. They knew machines could change the world. They simply asked, change for whom? They never fought the machine itself. They fought the way it was used, not to uplift, but to displace, not to elevate human life, but to reduce it to numbers, wages, and yield. And so, their story is not one of primitive rejection. It is one of pleading, of protest, of people forced into silence. Ideas, but by the sound of progress, roaring too loudly to hear them. The whisper of the past imagined now. The cottage where Thomas once lived. It is empty, abandoned, the roof sagging, the hearth cold. Children pass it without noticing. Ivy creeps across the door. A loose shutter knocks softly in the wind inside. Under a flagstone, the letter still rests, the one Thomas wrote, folded carefully, unread. No one has found it, but perhaps that's not the point. Perhaps it was never meant to be read, only written, a final stitch in a life once filled with craft, a quiet act of rebellion against vanishing, a world that doesn't look back in Manchester's newer districts. Gleaming iron bridges rise, gasworks hum, trains whistle through the night. There are more people now than ever before, but fewer who remember what came before. The rebellion has been paved over, brick by brick. A statue is raised, not to Thomas or Ned Ludd or any weaver, but to an inventor, a magnate, a man with a ledger. The past is still here, but it's buried, in letters not opened, in frames never repaired, in hands that once created and now only operate. The Luddites do not return, but they remain in the quiet resistance of those who still ask questions, in the unease that sometimes slips through late-night thoughts, in the doubt that follows blind advancement, not to halt the world, but to remind it, not all speed is forward. In the final years, what remains isn't resistance. It's rhythm, a slow, cautious rhythm of surviving, of adapting even when the terms feel unfair, of rising each day even after your purpose has been taken. Thomas does not speak of the Luddite anymore, not because he is ashamed, but because it's something that lives inside him now, not in memory, but in marrow. There are others like him in other towns, people who once believed that change could be negotiated, who tried to argue for the dignity of the handmaid, who stood before machines and whispered, "This is not all there is." An empty lumen, an attic near Stockport. There is an old loom. It hasn't been used in years. Dust thickens across its beams. One of the foot pedals is cracked. The threads that once stretched across it have long since snapped. A boy climbs into the attic one day, chasing a cat. He stumbles across the loom. He stares at it, puzzled. He calls to his father. What is this? His father, who once worked in the mills but now delivers coal, shrugs. Something old. That's all that's said. The loom remains. Not a monument, not a relic, just forgotten wood in a forgotten room. But the boy remembers it. Years later, he'll speak of it again, and something will stir, not in the loom, but in the idea that once a machine was made to serve hands, not to replace them. Quiet pride. Thomas never saw himself as a hero. He didn't want to be remembered. He only wanted to matter, to be able to make, to provide, to pass something on. His hands, though bent and worn, still know the shape of tools. He sometimes weaves small things, belts, cords, gifts, not for sale, but for memory. He gives them to neighbors, quietly, without explanation. They accept them, not knowing the full story, but they feel the weight of them, how carefully they're made, how steady the knots are, how each thread seems to carry purpose. And that, perhaps, is what remains of the Luddites. Not rage, but pride, not loud protest, but the quiet, persistent refusal to vanish completely. The burial beneath the soil years. After Thomas passes, his grave is covered in weeds. The cemetery is full now. Manchester has grown. Factories hum day and night. Electric lights buzz overhead. But one spring afternoon, a girl comes with her mother to visit a relative's stone nearby. While the adults speak softly, the girl wanders a little. She finds a smooth stone, half buried. No name, just a shape. She brushes it gently with her sleeve, then places a wildflower beside it. Then she walks away. She never knows whose grave it was. But in that moment, something ancient, something defiant is remembered again, if only for a breath. A thread continues. The world forgets in layers. It forgets the names, then the dates, then the meaning. But some threads endure. A mechanic adjusting a tool by hand. A teacher explaining the importance of craft. A child wondering why a loom once needed a person, not just power. These are not revolutions. They are echoes. The kind that drift softly through time. The kind that ask us not to go backward, but to carry the human with us as we go forward. You walk through the streets of Manchester and see the brick, the factories, the chimneys, the canals, but beneath your feet, beneath the soot and stone, lies something softer, whiter, more powerful than iron, more enduring than coal. Cotton not just as cloth, but as a substance that shaped nations, a crop that connected continents, and a mystery whose threads lead far beyond the mills. The thread that stretches Manchester was never an island. It may have looked self-contained, the spinning frames, the factory bells, the stacks of cloth on wagons, but nothing it produced began there. For every bolt of finished cotton that left the city, there was a field far away where fingers, darker and smaller, plucked the fibers from stems. Fields in Barbados, in Guyana, in Mississippi, in Jamaica, in India, and the hands that harvested them did so under sun and suffering, enslaved, indentured, or later years paid so little they might as well have been unpaid. This is the part of the story that was never spoken in Manchester. You could walk through the spinning rooms without once hearing the names of the plantations. You could touch the fabric without knowing what it cost, and for centuries, the system preferred it that way. The ledgers that omitted historians looking back now find gaps. Company ledgers list shipments, weights, profits, but rarely do they list names, not the names of the people who worked the fields, not the children who carried baskets twice their size, not the women who picked in silence under the eyes of overseers, not the men who were sold as tools and buried without gravestones. And so the cotton becomes mysterious, not because we don't know where it came from, but because so many lives were deliberately erased from its history. It is a mystery by omission, a silence that was constructed, preserved, and passed on. But the cloth remembers. It holds the heat of those fields, the weight of that labor, the soft, almost invisible stain of a life pressed between trade and textile. A fragment in the soil. In 2002, archaeologists in Manchester began work on a redevelopment site near an old canal. They dug below the modern layers, past concrete, past paving stones, and found something unexpected: a small, sealed cellar. Inside, cotton bales, unfinished, discarded. Next to them, something more fragile: letters, pages from old shipping, books, fragments of fabric with strange dyes. But what stood out most was a handwritten note on faded blue paper, wedged beneath a crate. The bales from Suriname pour wait tell James to check origin again. Untrustworthy middlemen. A small sentence, but full of implication. Suriname, a Dutch colony, known for brutal plantation systems. This note, now faded and brittle, confirmed what had long been suspected. Manchester's prosperity was built not just on cotton, but on colonial cotton. Cotton whose weight was soaked in pain. The names that remain unfound try to trace a shirt made in 1820. Follow the thread. From the mill in Ancoats, across the Atlantic, to a plantation near Charleston, the shirt was sewn by a woman named Elizabeth. She worked 16 hours a day. She was paid by the piece, but who grew the cotton? We don't know. There are no records of his name or her name, just entries like 20 bales, R.T. Miller Estate. And that's what the mystery of cotton reveals. That even as wealth grew, as cities rose, as empire flourished, the people who made it possible were made invisible. This was not accidental. It was designed. Now picture a dock. It is early morning. The air is damp. The planks beneath your feet creak softly with each shifting tide. The river Mersey breathes a cold mist into the port of Liverpool. To the untrained eye, the ships moored here look ordinary. masts, tall hulls, tar black, crewmen moving like shadows. But this dock does not just hold ships. It holds a silence, a carefully composed silence, one that hums beneath the crates, beneath the contracts, beneath the clipped voices of merchants. For every cargo manifest listing cotton as freight, there is another story unstated. These ships carried more than cloth. They carried history, and they brought back wealth from pain. The triangle unspoken, you've heard of it. Perhaps the triangular trade, a neat diagram in textbooks. Britain to Africa, Africa to the Americas, the Americas back to Britain. What textbooks rarely dwell on is how this triangle was greased, not with economics, but with human suffering. From England, ships sailed to the West African coast, loaded with cloth, beads, guns. There, those goods were traded for people, men, women, children, chained, branded, and forced into holds so tight that standing was impossible. They crossed the Atlantic in silence, broken only by groans and waves. Those who survived were sold to plantations in the Caribbean and the American South, places where cotton bloomed under sun that burned and hope that vanished. From those same ports, raw cotton was loaded onto ships again, bound for Liverpool, Bristol, or directly up the canals to Manchester. And with each loop of the triangle, fortunes grew and names disappeared. The Ledger and the Chainot, the Liverpool Maritime Museum. Tucked in a quiet room near the staircase, there is a book. It rests behind glass, its spine cracked, its pages yellowing. It is a ledger from 1792. On its pages, neat rows of numbers, ship names, tonnage, cargo details, dates of departure and return, and at the top of one column, lives delivered. Not a phrase, not a memorial, just an entry, casual, cold, measured in dozens, sometimes hundreds. No individual names, no faces, only totals. This is how history preserves certain things in numbers too large to feel real. The cotton itself, cotton, when first harvested, is not soft. It comes tangled, rough, full of seeds and debris. It must be cleaned, sorted, combed, spun. In Manchester, these tasks are done by machines. In the fields, they are done by hands. Hands that are sunburnt, blistered, cut. Hands that move fast because slowness means punishment. Hands of children who don't remember anything but cotton. And yet the cloth that emerges is beautiful, white, smooth, whisper, thin. It lines the collars of noblemen's coats. It adorns the hems of ladies' dresses. It carries with it not a scent of toil, but perfume. It arrives divorced from its origin. The pain is pressed out, bleached away. But still, if you hold it long enough and quiet your mind, you may feel the weight it carries. The ghosts of the warehouse behind the mills in Manchester stood vast warehouses, cool, echoing places, where bales of cotton were stacked, sorted, stored. Workers moved through them without thought, piling, lifting, marking bales with chalk. But archaeologists, years later, found something unexpected inside one such warehouse. An old wall, long since boarded over. Beneath the plaster, someone had scratched words into the brick with a nail or small blade, faint but legible. I know where this comes from. I've seen the ship. No name, no date, just a quiet refusal to forget. Even in systems built to silence, people find ways to speak. Not loudly, not always in words, but in actions, symbols, songs, a cloth folded a certain way, a pattern that mimics a homeland flower, a lullaby hummed when no overseer is near. The mystery of cotton is not only the pain it carries, but the messages sewn into its seams. The resistance you cannot measure in ledgers or freight records, but in the endurance of memory, in the refusal to disappear. Patterns as protest in the late 18th century. Cloth from Manchester flooded the markets of West Africa. Bright calicos, checked ginghams, floral prints stamped by machine presses. But, on occasion, returning merchants noted something odd, that the fabrics sent from England were being altered, overdeed, recut, resewn into forms that mimicked older patterns, pre-colonial styles, symbols that referenced gods, ancestors, stories older than the empire itself. Even under trade's heavy weight, identity was re-stitched and sometimes hidden among the bales of export cloth. Museum curators now find hand-drawn designs, subtle etchings of spears, of rivers, of birds, found only in Africa. Was this resistance, or memory, or simply a quiet no to a world that tried to overwrite everything? The letters never answered. A plantation ledger held in the archives of Lancashire. A curious discovery was made. Tucked between two pages, folded and forgotten, was a scrap of rough paper, not in the handwriting of the estate manager, but someone else entirely. Written in faint, careful English, I was born near the coast. I do not know the name they call it here. I make cotton each day. My brother is gone. I sing to remember I am not lost. No reply, no record of who wrote it, but it remains tucked in the archives, quietly waiting. Some believe it was smuggled aboard a cotton bale, meant to be found. Others say it was an accident, a voice that escaped the silence by chance. Either way, it reminds us, people were not cargo. They were not labor units. They were memory, will, and endurance. The archaeology of absence. You might imagine that archaeology always finds bones, pottery, tools, but sometimes it finds absence in old worker tenements near the Manchester mills. Excavators found hundreds of cloth fragments, mostly rags, scraps, and linings. But among them, several were traced back to West African textile styles, sewn into collars or headscarves. These weren't imports, they were adaptations, remnants of cultural persistence, worn quietly in the shadows of the spinning rooms. Not rebellion, not as history defines it, but a softer refusal, a carrying of self. When asked why such fragments were preserved, one archaeologist said, because cotton remembers. It holds heat, smell, oil, story. It outlives the skin, and so these fragments speak, not loudly, not clearly, but enough. A prayer in the fibres in one of Manchester's oldest museums. There's a bundle of thread, not labeled, not displayed, just stored with a tag. Cotton sample, provenance unknown. Yet, under microscope, historians found something remarkable. The fibers weren't industrial. They were hand-spun, twisted unevenly, and nestled in the twist. Fragments of clay beads, traditional 2 parts of the Gold Coast. Someone spun it by hand. Likely a woman, possibly enslaved, possibly free. But within that thread, her rhythm, her prayer, not written, not spoken, but felt. The final chapter of Cotton's journey ends far from fields and mills. It ends in drawing rooms, in tea parlors, in the folds of dresses that rustle softly across polished wood floors. It ends in silence, not the silence of labor or pain, but the cultivated hush of polite society. And within that hush, the mystery deepens, because the people who wore the cotton rarely asked where it came from. Cloth without a story. In 1815, a Manchester mill produced a luxurious muslin, almost translucent, light enough to be pulled through a wedding ring. It was immediately fashionable. London tailors offered it as the height of elegance. Portraits of the time show noble women draped in it, seated beside potted palms or painted Chinese screens. But behind the gauze of fashion lay the unseen world, a child in Bengal harvesting raw fiber in monsoon season, a teenager in Georgia's cotton belt picking for 14 hours, a girl in Manchester whose fingers bled feeding spools into a frame. None of these lives were stitched into the final garment. They were ... edited out, replaced with floral trim, a ribbon, a label that said imported fine cotton, British made. The unseen Watay gentleman, dressed in a finely tailored cotton waistcoat, leans against a mantel, speaking of philosophy. He praises liberty. He quotes Voltaire. He sips tea, sweetened with Caribbean sugar, from a porcelain cup, fingers gloved in cotton. He speaks of progress, of the greatness of British industry. And as he gestures, the light catches the embroidery on his sleeve, a pattern imported from India, replicated by British machines. He does not see the irony. He does not hear the distant echoes of auction blocks, of crying children, of ships creaking under cargo and chain, because those echoes have been muffled, softened beneath layers of wealth and distance. The households that forgot the cotton fills every room, bed sheets in the master chamber, curtains drawn against the midday sun, tablecloths for quiet dinners and letters sent abroad becomes background, natural, expected, but occasionally, in the fold of a hymn, a tag still attached, an export mark from Barbados. She reads it, frowns, then clips it off and burns it in the scullery stove, not out of cruelty, but out of uncertainty. It's easier not to ask, easier to smooth the cloth than to pull at the thread. The Museum of Unclaimed Stories, in a quiet wing of a London textile museum, sits an exhibit few visitors linger in. Cases hold swatches of cloth, spools of thread, shipping records, a cracked loom wheel. No mannequins, no names, just fabric. Each piece tells nothing aloud. But when curators dim the lights in the evening and the footfall fades, the room feels thick as though full of breath held in. Some believe this is where the ghosts gather, not to haunt, but to wait, to see if anyone will ask the right questions. While workers rose before the first light of dawn, while looms clattered and children coughed in damp, spinning rooms, there was another world in Manchester, a quieter world, a higher world, a world above the smoke. It existed in Georgian terraces set back from the factory district, in drawing rooms with French wallpaper, in kitchens where meals arrived untouched by soot, in parlors where pianos were tuned and daughters practiced embroidery. This was the world of the mill owners, the new industrial gentry, not born noble, but rising rapidly, with steam, with coal, and with cotton. They called themselves practical men, but they moved through their days with quiet precision, believing deeply in order, discipline, and a certain kind of divine entitlement. The morning begins. The master rises later than his workers. Perhaps just before 7, the hearth is already lit. The servant has prepared his shaving basin. The air smells of waxed floors, polished oak, starch. He reads the paper over breakfast. The Manchester Guardian, folded perfectly beside boiled eggs and bread. He checks the price of cotton. He marks the latest rail developments. He pauses at news of unrest in the colonies, but says nothing. His wife is not yet at the table. She eats separately. The children are still being dressed by the governess. There is no rush. The factory runs whether he hurries or not. The walk to the counting house at precisely 8 o'clock. He leaves. The master wears a dark coat, stiff collar, walking stick, gloves in colder months. He does not go straight to the factory floor. He walks to the counting house, a small, private office near the front gates of the mill. There, he reviews tallies, workers' attendance, output, shipments. He signs papers, writes checks, considers whether new machinery should be purchased from Birmingham or Leeds. He rarely steps into the spinning room. If he does, it is only to show a visitor, a foreign buyer, perhaps, or a cousin from London to him. The factory is a machine, not a place. The workers, a necessary part of its movement, not its heart. The mistress of the house back home. The mistress's day unfolds quietly. She supervises servants, writes letters, ensures the children attend their lessons. She might embroider in the sunroom or review menus with the cook. She sees little of the factory, but she hears its distant hum, a low murmur beneath the rhythm of her domestic routine. On occasion, she visits the workers' homes as part of a charitable society. She brings soup, clothes, a Bible. She speaks gently, with concern, but when she returns home, she removes her gloves carefully. She has been kind, she has been dutiful, and she believes this kindness justifies everything else. The philosophy of paternalism, to understand the Miloning class, is to understand self-justification. They do not see themselves as oppressors. They see themselves as guardians, providers of work, housing, purpose. Many speak of their workers as children, incapable of independence, needing guidance, order, morality. They sponsor Sunday schools. They discourage unions. They believe in church, in duty, in a natural order. They do not question why they have so much. They believe they earned it, and that the poor, while pitiable, have their proper place. The great houses of Manchester's mill owners were not castles, not old, not crumbling, not noble in the traditional sense. They were newer, straighter, red brick, with cast-iron gates, proper, symmetrical, orderly, like the factories that funded them. But behind the walls, beyond the gas lamps and velvet chairs, life for the Miloning class was anything but simple. Their wealth was recent, their power precarious. Their respectability had to be performed day after day, season after season. The home as a stage. Everything in the home of a successful mill owner was intentional. The drapery was imported. The dining service was complete, even if seldom used. The pianoforte was kept tuned. The bookcase was filled with volumes on history, philosophy, and trade. Visitors must always see the right balance of luxury and restraint. To display too much finery was vulgar. To show too little was to risk being mistaken for the very class I employed. The drawing room was not just a room. It was proof to neighbors, investors, and in-laws that you belonged. The private tension, though outwardly confident, many Industrialists lived with a tension they rarely voiced. They knew their fathers had been tradesmen. They knew the factories reeked of accidents and unrest. They knew their wealth flowed from hundreds of laborers, paid in halfpence and bread. And they knew, quietly, that this was not how the aristocracy lived. They lacked bloodlines. They lacked the polish of Oxbridge, the security of inherited land. So they compensated through order, through discipline, through polished boots and punctuality, and speaking French only at dinner. They built schools and chapels for their workers. They hosted lectures on moral reform. They hired governesses to teach their children Latin and sewing in equal measure. But none of it truly erased the quiet fear. What if the world still saw them as upstarts? The factory as extension of the self for many mill owners. The factory was not just a source of income, it was an extension of identity, a monument to willpower. To own a mill was to tame nature, to bend rivers, harness steam, reshape the lives of hundreds. Each machine on the floor was like a vein in a larger body, each bolt of cloth a proof of order. They did not weave themselves, but they understood gears, costs, cycles. They walked the floors not as craftsmen, but as architects of a new age, an age of discipline. They demanded punctuality, sobriety, stillness, and yet, at home, their own children ran free on polished floors, played with tin toys, napped beneath the same cotton their factories made. The illusion of control. They believed they controlled everything, the hours, the machinery, the wages, the walls. But storms still came. Markets collapsed, ships ran aground, crops failed overseas, and, worst of all, sometimes workers resisted. A strike, a walkout, a petition. Suddenly, the world no longer obeyed the bell. The mill owner, staring at the still machines, would pace the counting house. He would speak of ungratefulness, but beneath the words lay something else. Doubt. Had he misunderstood them? Had he offered enough? Did his charity, his discipline, his chapel building really justify their loyalty? He would not say it aloud, but it would keep him up at night, long after the gaslights were dimmed. As the afternoon stretches into evening, the household begins to shift. The factory grows quiet. The workers return to cramped streets and stone steps. But here, in the owner's home, life is just turning toward its most deliberate hours. Everything now is about maintaining the image of order, of refinement, of rightness. There are no accidents here, no wasted movements. Every act, from a daughter's posture to the polish on a silver fork, is part of a carefully tended ritual, not for vanity, but for permanence. The children of the house, the children of the industrial elite, are not raised for leisure. They are raised for legacy. The boys attend private academies, often taught by tutors from Oxford or Edinburgh. They learn Latin, French, business arithmetic, and scripture. They memorize lines from Horace Boo. They are also shown the ledgers of the mill, taught how to read a profit sheet, how to walk the floor with presence, not as laborers, but as overseers. From a young age, they are told, "This will be yours one day." They do not question it. Inheritance is not a gift. It is a burden wrapped in expectation. The daughters domain the daughters, meanwhile, are trained for a different kind of power. They are taught etiquette, music, embroidery, and small bits of history, not the kind of history found in battlefields or empires, but the social history of calling cards, introductions, and marriage alliances. A daughter's success is measured not by skill or wit, but by how she carries herself when seated, how softly she speaks, how many suitors she may attract at a winter ball. Her future is not a business ledger. It is a name joined with another family to strengthen standing and cement reputation. And though her corset is laced each morning by a maid, she, too, wears the weight of expectation. She smiles, she curtsies, and in quiet moments, she looks out the window and wonders what happens in the streets below. Streets she's never walked. The social seasons, the evenings are for appearance. Dinner is served at 7. The table is set with fine bone china and decanters of wine. The conversation is low, measured, carefully steered away from unpleasant topics. After dinner, the ladies retire to the drawing room. The men remain, speaking of shipping routes, tariffs, and rumors of strikes. Then there are guests, a visiting cousin from Liverpool, a banker's wife, a London textile agent. These evenings are not indulgences. They are investments. Every smile, every remark about the weather is a subtle negotiation of status. And when the guests leave, the servants clean, and the mistress of the house retreats to her dressing room. There is a long pause. The house finally exhales, the calculated future before bed. The master reviews the week's returns. He lights a lamp. He unfolds the ledger. He writes neatly: coal purchases, cloth orders, 2 new looms arriving next month. He pauses at a line, noting a minor accident, spinner's hand caught, compensation issued, 3 shillings. He frowns, then turns the page. It is not indifference, but rather a belief that the system must keep moving. His house, his children's schooling, the piano, the painting in the hallway, all of it rests on the mill continuing without interruption. So he calculates, he considers. He does not feel wicked, he feels responsible. And responsibility, he believes, requires a certain hardness. Everything built in brick and stone eventually begins to shift. Not suddenly, not with fire or collapse, but with cracks, small, almost imperceptible, like hairline fractures in a once-polished window pane. The mill owners of Manchester believed their world was stable, grounded, orderly, but time, like smoke, moves in ways no one can contain. And by the late 19th century, the pillars of their quiet authority had begun to tremble. Whispers beneath the windows from the back parlor of a mill owner's home. You could hear it now and then, not clearly, but enough. The marches, the sound of boots on cobbled streets, the chants, low, rhythmic, unsettling in their unity. Outside, workers had begun to gather, to speak, to organize. Unions, once illegal and dangerous, had found footholds. Pamphlets passed between rough hands. Petitions written by lamplight in boarding houses. They didn't shout down with the masters. They said, "We deserve more. We are not children. We will not suffer in silence." For the first time, the old model of paternalism, of the master who cares and the worker who obeys, was beginning to fray. The inheritance in question, some heirs of the great mill dynasties, embraced the change. They spoke of reform, of representation, of progress. They tried to modernize, to build housing, to shorten hours, but others turned away. The profits were no longer as easy. The looms broke more often. Foreign competition increased, and the children of privilege, raised in comfort, did not always wish to manage spinning frames and payrolls. Some moved to London. Some sold the mills. Some simply let the machines fall silent. And the buildings, once so proud, so humming with force, became shells. Windows shattered. Roofs sagged. Weeds pushing through cobblestone. The rhythm of cotton, of control, had ended. The crumbling Imogen parlors that once hosted ministers and textile barons, portraits began to fade. The stern-faced patriarchs in black coats, the women seated beside pianofortes, all gazed down on rooms no longer filled with voices. Servants were dismissed. Gardens went untended. Silver was quietly sold. The grand houses were too large, too drafty, too costly to heat, and with each season, more families left Manchester entirely. They did not fall to ruin, but they faded gently, like the smoke they once commanded. What remains today? You can walk the streets of Manchester and still find traces. The factory walls, now turned into artist studios. The counting houses, quiet behind glass doors. The great homes, now law offices or museums. And inside, some of them, in drawers or archives or back rooms, you may find a relic, a spool, a ledger, a child's stitched sampler, proof that once a family believed the world could be managed with routine, respectability, and cloth. Their power was real, but it was not eternal. It hummed with machines. It faded with time. And in the end, it was just another story told in brick and soot and silence. Let yourself rest here. You've wandered through smoke and steel, through noise and shadow, through wealth built quietly on the backs of many. You've seen how order can be both comforting and cruel, how silence can mask suffering but not erase it. And as the night settles, as the last echoes of the looms fall still, you can drift into sleep, knowing that the city is quiet now. The chimneys no longer roar. The masters no longer watch. Only the bricks remain, and memory, soft as cotton, drifting in the dark. So now, as the factories fall silent in your mind, as the soot settles, and the streets of old Manchester fade into mist, let yourself drift. You've walked where thousands once labored. You've seen the mills from below and from above. You've heard the rhythm of the machines and the quieter rhythms of lives shaped by them. The thread that once ran through every hand in the city now loosens, unwinds, and you are free to let it go. No more clocks, no more ledgers, no more echoes of footsteps on damp factory floors. Just rest. History never truly sleeps, but for now, you can dot. Thank you for joining me. Sleep well, and whenever you need, this quiet corner of history will be waiting for you again.